You won't believe what happened to little Isadora, just 12 years old, when she was rushed to the hospital with a pain that, at first glance, seemed like something simple. Isadora was a girl like so many others. Sweet. A dreamer. With her eyes shining every time she talked about the future. Shy, creative, passionate about animals and painting the world with the most unlikely colors. Everything seemed normal. Until one morning the family's routine was broken by a frightening whisper. "Mom, my stomach hurts, but it's different. It feels like there's something inside me." Her mother, Patricia, thought it was just colic. Her father, Eduardo, said that maybe it was something she ate the night before. But the minutes passed, and the pain didn't go away. In fact, it only got worse. Isadora curled up in bed, her face wet with tears. She cried softly, trying not to scare her parents. But inside, she was panicking. That's when Patricia ran to her daughter, picked her up, and screamed for Eduardo. They ran to the hospital in the small town of Brookfield in the interior of Illinois. Isadora screamed in the back seat of the car. "It hurts, Daddy. Please, help me." The mother was shaking. The father stepped on the accelerator. The clock seemed to stop ticking. When they arrived at the hospital, the girl was immediately taken to triage. And that's when everything changed. The medical team, which was dealing with routine care, stopped everything when they saw the girl's condition. One of the nurses even said, "This child needs help now. Call Dr. Fernandez. This is an emergency." What the doctors discovered there shocked the entire team. And what came next? Nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared to hear it. This is a true story. A story that was almost forgotten, but that needs to be told. If you believe that some truths can no longer be hidden, like it now, and subscribe to the channel, because what you are going to hear today will leave you speechless. Take a deep breath, because what comes next will move you. It hurts, Mommy, it hurts a lot. Patricia held her daughter in her arms, trying to stay calm, even with her hands shaking and her heart racing. Eduardo, already desperate, immediately called the local hospital. But Brookfield was a small town, and the night shift had only one general practitioner. Even so, they didn't wait. They hurriedly dressed Isadora, got in the car and went straight to the emergency room. When they arrived, the doctor on duty, a calm-looking but clearly exhausted man, quickly examined Isadora. He immediately noticed something unusual. The girl's belly was swollen. Slightly, but enough to raise alarm bells. "This isn't normal for her age," he murmured, looking worried. He gave her an injection to relieve the pain and made a direct recommendation. "Tomorrow, as soon as dawn breaks, take her to Chicago Central Hospital. This needs to be evaluated in a more structured way. And urgently." And so it was done. At 6 in the morning, the parents boarded the first bus with their daughter to Chicago. During the trip, Isadora didn't say a word. She was pale, weak, with her eyes half open and her body almost limp. Patricia held her daughter's hand tightly. The tears flowed silently. Eduardo looked out the window, swallowing hard, struggling not to lose control. When they arrived at the Central Hospital, they were greeted by one of the most respected doctors in pediatrics, Dr. Helena Montero. Attentive, firm, but with a sweet look in her eyes, she listened to every detail of the case. She asked quick questions. It took her a few minutes to decide. "We're going to admit Isadora now. I want an abdominal ultrasound, a complete blood count, a CT scan. No room for error. This needs to be investigated with extreme caution." While Isadora was being taken away by the nurses, the parents waited. Patricia, sitting with her head down, prayed silently, asking for only one thing. May it not be serious. Eduardo paced back and forth, hands in his pockets. Empty look. Every second was torture. Hours later, the tests began to be analyzed. It was then that one of the residents called Dr. Helena to the imaging room. She approached the screen. She frowned and said in a low voice, "This here is not common." She immediately asked for the imaging specialist to come. A few minutes later, the doctor arrived. He adjusted the screen, zoomed in, compared it to the blood tests. Silence filled the room. Everyone's eyes were fixed on a single point. Call the pediatrics team. I want more opinions. Now, Helena ordered. A second doctor came in. Then a third. Within a few minutes, 3 specialists were there around the screen, discussing in low voices, looking at each other, their expressions becoming more and more serious. Meanwhile, on the other side of the hospital, Isadora had been taken back to her room. She was drowsy because of the medication. But the pain was still there, stronger than before. Patricia, now beside the bed, cried softly. She stroked her daughter's hair with a delicacy that only a desperate mother can have. Eduardo, standing in the corner of the room with tears in his eyes, pressed his lips tightly together. He tried to hold back his tears, but inside he was already falling apart. And he had no idea what he was about to discover. They didn't know what was happening. And that, for any parent, is the worst kind of despair. Almost 2 hours after the last exam, the bedroom door slowly opened. Dr. Helena came in. Her expression was even more serious than before. She walked over to the bed, examined Isadora with extreme care. Then she turned to her parents. Mr. Eduardo? Miss Patricia? Can you come with me to the meeting room, please? At that moment, Patricia's heart almost stopped. She knew, as every mother knows, that when a doctor calls for a private conversation, it's rarely good news. In the room, 2 doctors were already waiting for them. Dr. Helena herself and the imaging specialist. The room was silent. Tense. Helena took a deep breath. And then she spoke, her voice calm, but firm. We found something. Something unusual in the exams. Before any definitive diagnosis, we need to do one more exam. A more specific, highly precise procedure. We need to be sure of what we are seeing. Eduardo tried to maintain his posture, but his voice was shaky. But, will my daughter be okay? The doctor hesitated for a brief moment. Then she looked into his eyes and answered. She is stable. But, we need to act quickly. That same night, Isadora was taken for an exam with contrast, an advanced ultrasound. The exam was long, delicate, and the silence only made the anguish grow. Patricia, sitting in the waiting room, could no longer hold back her tears. Eduardo, with his elbows resting on his knees and his face in his hands, tried to stay steady, but it was like being in a nightmare from which one could not wake up. Deep down they felt that something serious was coming. But, not even in their worst nightmares, could they imagine what was about to be revealed. A little before 11 p.m. the exam was ready. Dr. Helena returned to the room holding a white envelope in her hands. Her steps were slow. And just by the expression on her face, it was clear. What was coming next would not be easy to hear. Please, have a seat. Patricia squeezed her husband's hand. The two looked at each other, speechless. The doctor pulled up a chair, calmly opened the envelope. She took a deep breath and said, "What I'm going to say now may shock you, but you need to be prepared." She began to take the pictures out of the envelope, but before she could continue, the door to the room opened with a bang. A nurse came in visibly distressed. "Doctor, I'm sorry, but we have an emergency. It's serious." The nurse interrupted abruptly. Dr. Helena stopped. She looked at Isadora's parents with empathy and said, "Just give me a few minutes. I'll be right back, I promise." And she left the room in a hurry. In that hospital, time seemed to have frozen. The hours passed slowly, heavily, while Isadora remained in the room with her belly increasingly swollen, and a pain that was no longer bearable. Patricia did not leave her daughter's side. She stroked her hair, whispering words of comfort, trying to appear strong. But inside, she was in pieces. Eduardo paced back and forth in the hallway. His face was sweaty, his eyes red, his heart racing. He no longer knew whether to pray, or scream, or just wait for the worst. It was only around 20 past midnight that Dr. Helena returned. She was carrying a clipboard in her hands, and an expression on her face that made both parents get up immediately. "Let's talk in the hallway. Please." They left the room. The doctor closed the door behind her. And there, in the silence of that cold, white hallway, she took a deep breath. She paused. She looked into each of their eyes. And then she said, "The test revealed something that deeply surprised us. It's not an infection. It's not a gastrointestinal problem." Patricia and Eduardo looked at each other, unable to say anything. The doctor continued in the calmest tone of voice she could muster. "Isadora's body is showing clear signs of pregnancy." The shock was immediate. Patricia took a step back, holding her husband's arm to keep from falling. Eduardo stood still. His face turned pale. His eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. This isn't possible." He murmured, his voice almost muffled. "She's only 12. Dr. Helena nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. And she explained with all the care in the world. "The ultrasound confirmed the presence of a fetus. The pregnancy is advanced. We are talking about a pregnancy in the final stages. Almost ready for delivery." It was as if the ground had disappeared from under Patricia's feet. No, this is a mistake. My daughter, she's just a child. She would never. This can't be happening." But it was. The exams were clear. There was a heartbeat. There was movement. There was life inside. It was then that Eduardo asked the question that no one had the courage to ask until that moment. "Who did this to my daughter?" The silence that followed was deafening. No one was breathing. At that moment everything changed. From that moment on, the case was no longer a medical one. It also became a police case. The hospital management was immediately notified. A social worker was called. And the Chicago police were alerted. The story of a 12-year-old pregnant girl began to circulate through the halls like lightning. The entire hospital was in shock. During the preparations for the birth, with exams, tests, and constant monitoring, one of the doctors noticed something strange in the ultrasound images. They called the head obstetrician, Dr. Enrique Martins, to review the details with extra attention. A few minutes later, Dr. Helena Montero returned to the room. Her face was pale. Her gaze was tense. She addressed the parents. "We need to talk. We discovered something unusual. Something we've never seen before in a case like this." Eduardo's eyes widened. "What do you mean? What else, now?" The doctor didn't answer right away. She just asked the two of them to accompany her to the private room. The atmosphere inside was heavy, suffocating, almost unbearable. Meanwhile, the hubbub grew louder throughout the hospital. Nurses looked at each other without saying a word. Doctors walked quickly, whispering, "This doesn't make sense. How is this possible?" Patricia, in shock, repeated to herself, "How did this happen without me noticing? She was always so quiet, so sweet, with her dolls, with her drawings, always so innocent." Eduardo, however, was silent. But what was in his eyes was a contained fury, a mixture of pain, helplessness, and a thirst for justice. As much as the past could not be changed, he could still protect his daughter, even though it was already too late to prevent what had happened. From the medical side, the situation was critical. Isadora was feeling increasingly severe pain. The pregnancy was in its final stages, and the birth needed to be planned as soon as possible. It was then that Dr. Enrique stopped in front of the images from the last ultrasound. He frowned. He called Dr. Helena discreetly. "Look at this here. The baby looks healthy, but this formation on the side, that's not normal." On the screen, an unusual shadow appeared in Isadora's abdominal region. Something that hadn't appeared in the previous exams. Something displaced. Without hesitation, the doctor ordered, "Request an MRI. Now." The mood on the team was tense. Very tense. While the exams were being done, no one dared to give an explanation to the parents. It was necessary to be certain. And what that image would soon reveal would go far beyond anything medicine had ever seen. Hours passed. The dawn was already taking over Chicago. The hospital was completely silent, but the tension was unbearable. The MRI images finally arrived. When the reports began to be analyzed, the medical team's room fell into absolute silence. One of the specialists, staring at the screen, murmured, This doesn't make any sense." The images didn't just show the baby. They showed something else. Next to the uterus there was a strange structure. A living mass with an organic appearance, but without a heartbeat, without movement, without any independent activity. Dr. Helena Montero was paralyzed. She, with over 20 years of experience, whispered, "I've never seen anything like this. This goes far beyond an early pregnancy." The head obstetrician, Dr. Enrique, looked at the scan again and concluded, "Whatever it is, this can't stay there. Let's open it up. We need to see it with our own eyes." The order was given. Emergency C-section. Now, Isadora's body, at just 12 years old, wouldn't be able to handle a natural birth, and time was running out. While the surgical center was being prepared, Camila and Eduardo waited outside, still motionless, in silence, as if the air had gone out of there. Camila kept her eyes glued to the door of the room. She wasn't crying anymore. Now there was only an emptiness on her face, a silence that screamed. Eduardo was on the other side, arms crossed, fists clenched. The jaw was locked, but inside it, there was fire. The police had already arrived. An officer was positioned discreetly in the hallway. The city still didn't know. But there, in that room, something never seen before was about to be revealed. Before entering, with her eyes already heavy from sedation, Isadora, still lucid, looked at the doctors around her and asked softly, "Why are so many people looking at me like that?" No one answered, but that question echoed in everyone's hearts. And then, with all the professionals ready, the room was locked, the scalpels prepared. Because what was going to be removed from inside that girl's body wasn't just a baby. It was a secret, a mystery that defied everything that science knew. And that would change forever the lives of everyone who was about to see the impossible. The operating room was completely silent. The monitors pulsated, marking each heartbeat, but what could really be heard was the weight of tension in the air. Dr. Helena coordinated the final adjustments with the team. The head obstetrician, Dr. Enrique, took command of the procedure. And everyone there knew this was no ordinary surgery. It was more than medicine. It was something that no one could explain. The anesthesiologist's signal was given. Dr. Enrique took a deep breath, and then he made the first incision. Slowly, precisely. Each layer of Isadora's abdomen was opened with extreme care. And it was there, on the third layer, that he stopped. His eyes widened. He froze. He stared at the surgical field and murmured, "My God." The team looked at each other, alarmed. Dr. Helena approached to see what had caused the reaction. And as she looked, she instinctively took a step back. There was something there. Besides the baby. Another strange formation. As if it were connected to the uterus but at the same time, independent. "What is this?" whispered Dr. Helena. No one answered. Dr. Enrique continued cautiously. The baby was still there. And it was the priority. Minutes later, the weak cry that everyone was expecting finally echoed. It was a boy. Fragile. Small. Weighing just over 2 kilos. He was breathing with difficulty, but he was alive. He was immediately taken to the incubator, where a pediatric team was already waiting. But no one could take their eyes off what was still inside the girl's body. A shapeless mass, covered by a thin membrane. No heartbeat. No movement. With a disturbing appearance. It was as if it didn't belong in that body. As if it had been inserted there. Dr. Enrique, still analyzing, shook his head in disbelief. As soon as we stabilize Isadora and the baby, we'll remove this and send it for immediate analysis. He looked seriously at Dr. Helena. Her voice was still firm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Because honestly, I have no idea what this is. Isadora was sleeping soundly under the effects of anesthesia, not knowing what had just happened, not knowing that her son had been born, and without imagining that inside her there was something that could change everything. In the room, the mood was far from one of relief, because even with the successful birth, the mystery was only just beginning. There were no smiles. There was no relief. In the operating room, the tension was thick, almost palpable. The baby had been born, but the team's attention was not on him. It was on what was still inside the girl's body. Dr. Enrique approached the surgical field again. With slow and precise gestures, he began to remove the tissue around the unknown structure. Beside him, Dr. Helena watched with wide eyes. She broke the silence, her voice breaking. This doesn't look like a cyst or a tumor. It looks like something organic, but completely deformed. Everyone's eyes turned to the monitor. The live images showed that thing with disturbing clarity. It was a gelatinous formation, covered by a translucent membrane, connected to the uterus by something that resembled a fibrous cord. But the worst part, the hardest part to face, it was inside that membrane. A structure with an undefined shape, vaguely human, an incomplete body, as if it had started to develop, and then stopped. Dr. Enrique stepped back. He took off his gloves slowly. He looked at the screen as if wondering if it was real. Call the head of pathology. Prepare an immediate biopsy. This needs to be analyzed now. While the team moved in shock, outside the room, Patricia and Eduardo waited. And then, a sound crossed the hallway. Faint, but unmistakable. The crying of a baby. Patricia put her hands to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at her husband and whispered, "Did you hear?" He cried, "Our grandson, or..." She didn't finish. As if the thought itself was too confusing to be said out loud. It was then that the police chief arrived. With a firm but respectful posture, he approached the couple. A social worker stood next to him. "As soon as Isadora is conscious, we will need to talk to her. Carefully. Calmly. But we need to understand what happened." Patricia nodded, still in shock. And the police chief, after a brief pause, added, "If she is pregnant, someone did this to her." The social worker touched Patricia's shoulder. She looked into her eyes sweetly and said, "The priority now is Isadora. She will need a lot of support, psychological and emotional, and so will you." And it was at that moment that the door to the room opened. Dr. Enrique appeared. His face was tired. His gloves were stained, but the look, filled with something that no one wanted to hear. He was pale. His look lost. Dr. Enrique walked slowly towards Patricia and Eduardo. His voice low, controlled, but filled with a weight that seemed to crush each word. "The baby is alive. He's a boy. He was taken to the neonatal ICU. He's having trouble breathing, but he's strong." Patricia held Eduardo's hand tightly. But before they could ask anything, Dr. Enrique continued. "However, we found something besides the baby. An unusual formation. We're still trying to understand what it is." Eduardo narrowed his eyes, confused. "Formation? What kind of formation?" Dr. Enrique sighed, searching for the right words. "It means that there was something else inside Isadora. Something that is definitely not part of a normal pregnancy. We've already sent the material for analysis. As soon as we have any answers, I promise, we'll explain everything clearly." Silence. Patricia's gaze met Eduardo's. No sound was emitted, but the eyes said it all. Fear, confusion, disbelief, as if they were living a nightmare from which they simply could not wake up. And the most distressing thing? Nothing, absolutely nothing, would prepare them for what was to come. Because what was removed from Isadora's womb was not just strange, it was impossible. In the pathology department of Brookfield Hospital, an emergency protocol was activated. The contents removed from Isadora were immediately isolated, encapsulated in a sterile capsule, sealed, escorted by one of the most experienced technicians in the laboratory. The atmosphere in the corridors was dense. It was not just scientific curiosity. There was something more. Something like fear. Dr. Helena, head of pathology, received the material as soon as it arrived at the laboratory. And the first image under the microscope was enough for her to stop any other task. She frowned. Absolute silence. Then she immediately called two experts in embryology and genetics. What they saw was, to say the least, disconcerting. The formation, at first glance, resembled a malformed fetus. But there was something different. An incomplete symmetry. An irregular pattern. As if there had been a deliberate attempt at replication. It was not a common malformation. It was something constructed. Incomplete, yes, but with purpose. Meanwhile, in room 208 of the hospital, Isadora began to wake up. Her eyes opened slowly. The light in the room bothered her. Isadora blinked. She tried to understand where she was. The white ceiling. The continuous sound of machines. A strange smell of alcohol and silence. Patricia's face appeared before her, with teary eyes and a trembling smile. She approached, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "Daughter," she said in a whisper, "the baby is alive. It's okay, my love." Isadora blinked again. It took her a while to understand. "The baby?" she repeated, her voice weak, scratching her throat. But then, something changed. The expression of relief disappeared. Her face tightened. As if a memory, an image, a feeling, flashed through her mind like lightning. She put her hand to her belly. Instinctively. And she whispered, almost voiceless, "There was someone else there?" Patricia frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean, daughter? What do you mean by that?" But Isadora didn't answer. She just turned her face away slowly and stared at the white ceiling without blinking. She knew. She knew what she had felt during all those months. The nightmares. The feeling of being watched from the inside. The cold that went through her bones, even on the hottest days. That wasn't just pregnancy. It never was. On the lower floor of the hospital, in the genetic analysis sector, the tests were progressing. And the first results left the specialists in shock. The structure analyzed showed genetic traits identical to Isadora's, and also to those of the newborn baby. It was as if a duplication had begun. But it was interrupted halfway. One of the embryologists, staring at the monitor with wide eyes, murmured, "This isn't just a fetal malformation. It's an attempt at symbiosis." But it failed. Dr. Helena, who was monitoring the data in real time, pressed her lips together tightly. Dr. Enrique, on the other side of the room, read the reports with a pale face. "Seriously?" He turned to his colleague and said in a low voice, "This can't happen from here." "Not yet." Dr. Helena simply nodded. There was much more behind it. Much more than anyone there was prepared to face. Outside the hospital, night had already covered Brookfield with an icy blanket. The wind blew through the streets, but what was really chilling was the silence in the hallways. Eduardo paced back and forth, restless. His footsteps echoed empty. Patricia remained seated, her eyes fixed on the floor, her arms crossed over her chest. As if each second was draining the little energy she had left. It was as if time had stopped. It was then that the reception door opened. The social worker entered first. Behind her, the deputy in charge of the case. His eyes were hard, steady. but there was a flicker of bewilderment there, as if not even he was ready for what he would have to deal with. They both entered the room with a harder expression than before. The social worker and the deputy in charge of the case. Something had changed. The silence between them spoke louder than any word spoken. The police chief was direct. "We need to talk to Isadora." But he paused. His gaze shifted for a moment as if he were measuring each word. Patricia, sitting in the chair near the reception desk, looked up, her heart already racing. "There's more," he said. "We received an anonymous tip 3 months ago." The room went silent. According to the tip, Isadora was being watched. And something strange happened after she disappeared for 3 days, right at the beginning of her pregnancy. Eduardo reacted immediately. "That can't be right. She never left the house without telling us." "Never." Patricia, shocked, murmured. She would have told us." The social worker approached gently. She bent down until she was at Patricia's height, and in a soft voice she said, "Maybe she doesn't even know herself. When the trauma is deep, the mind blocks it. It creates gaps. It erases parts of the memory to protect it from what is unbearable to remember." Upstairs, in the almost dark room of the recovery room, Isadora was alone. The monitors emitted constant but soft sounds. Outside, the night covered Brookfield with a blanket of silence. She looked out the window. The tears fell. Silently. But it wasn't physical pain. Not only was a sensation. A strange emptiness. A fear she couldn't name. Suddenly something made her shiver. In the reflection of the window glass. For an instant, she saw other eyes behind hers. Staring. Dark. Empty. She blinked. And she was alone again. Or, at least that's what she thought. In the Genetic Analysis Center, the environment was silent and tense. The cold lights on the benches illuminated tubes, vials and slides. One of the samples collected during Isadora's cesarean section was being isolated for more detailed study. And then, something completely unexpected happened. Under the microscope, the inert tissue began to move. A subtle alarm flashed on one of the sensors. The technician in charge approached, thinking it was just a calibration error. He calmly adjusted the focus. But when he looked, his expression changed immediately. "Dr. Enrique, the tissue, it's moving." Dr. Enrique, who was already leaving the room with a report in hand, stopped, came back and approached the microscope. He looked and felt his body freeze. What he saw, it wasn't just movement. It was spontaneous electrical activity. Microscopic impulses ran through the sample, as if nerves were trying to reconnect. "This isn't normal regeneration," he murmured, unable to look away. Beside him, one of the monitors began to record rhythmic oscillations. Pulses. Similar to heartbeats. But that wasn't a heart. The silence in the examination room was almost absolute. Only the continuous sound of the equipment filled the room. Dr. Enrique remained motionless in front of the screen. The enlarged image showed an unusual anomaly in Isadora's upper abdominal region, detected during the postoperative exams. He called Dr. Helena over with a quick gesture. "This here wasn't reported in the previous ultrasound," he said, pointing to the image. "At first it looks like scar tissue, but look at the vascularization around it." Helena analyzed it carefully. "This is not common in newborns. And it shouldn't even be there. We sent a sample for biopsy. It just arrived." The result was clear but disturbing. An active cell cluster with a genetic pattern similar to Isadora's and her mother's. It wasn't a tumor. It was an incomplete embryonic formation. It could have been a monochorionic twin pregnancy, Dr. Helena explained, when one of the embryos develops normally and the other stops in the first few weeks. Enrique nodded. "But the strange thing is the location. This mass wasn't in the uterus. It was lodged near the liver." She took a deep breath. "It could be a rare case of fetus in feto." "Are you saying that Isadora was carrying The remains of her own twin brother inside her body? Enrique didn't answer right away. But that was it. In the recovery room, Isadora was sleeping under light sedation. Her vital signs were stable. But the doctors already knew that case would be monitored for many years. There was no immediate threat, but the history required constant attention. That successfully removed formation could have caused serious complications if it had not been detected in time. Downstairs, Patricia and Eduardo had been called for a private conversation. Dr. Enrique came in with an envelope of exams in his hands. He sat down with them with a calm but firm expression. The emergency surgery was successful. Isadora is out of danger. But we need to be transparent with you. He opened the envelope. He showed the images. He explained carefully. During the procedure, we found a non-viable embryonic formation inside her abdominal cavity. Most likely, a second embryo that stopped developing early in the pregnancy. It is rare, but it does happen. Patricia put her hand to her mouth, unable to contain her emotion. Eduardo remained silent. This does not mean that she will have any after effects, the doctor continued. But we will monitor her development very carefully. The couple simply nodded, still in shock. They had their daughter in their arms. But now they knew that she had come into the world carrying an even deeper story than they could have imagined. What did you find out? Patricia asked, her voice breaking, as if her heart had already foreseen what was to come. Inspector Oliveira, along with Dr. Enrique, sighed deeply, their eyes lowered, as if they were carrying the weight of everything they were about to reveal as well. Isadora was admitted to the hospital with severe abdominal pain and clear signs of physical aggression. Recent injuries, and others that were older. Patricia's eyes widened. Eduardo clenched his fists, feeling his body go cold. Does that mean that, someone? She mumbled, unable to finish. Yes. The police chief replied, firmly and painfully. Someone abused your daughter. And the evidence shows that this happened for a long time. Long before the pregnancy. The ground seemed to disappear beneath Patricia's feet. She staggered, and Eduardo ran to hold her. Neither of them could say anything. Only silence screamed. We will hear her as soon as the doctors allow it, the police chief continued. But with all the necessary psychological support. The priority now is to protect her. And to understand who did this, and how no one has seen it before. Upstairs, in the hospital conference room, Dr. Helena was talking to the social worker and the psychiatrist from the unit. Isadora's condition is delicate, said the psychiatrist. She may be dissociating from reality. This is common in victims of prolonged abuse, especially in childhood. The mind blocks. It blacks out. And sometimes it creates alternative realities to protect itself from the pain. The social worker nodded, apprehensive. The hardest part is that no one noticed her disappearance for 3 days. Not the school. Not the neighbors. Not even her own parents. She was there, but alone. What really worries is the context. The pregnancy, the traumas, and the complete emotional isolation of this girl. Later, late in the morning, Isadora woke up. Her eyes opened slowly, confused. The light made her frown. She tried to sit up, but her body didn't respond. The nurses approached carefully. One of them ran into the hallway. She woke up. Call Dr. Enrique, and notify the psychiatrist. Patricia was called to the room. Before entering, she was stopped by the doctor. Patricia, listen. She may not remember everything. Or she may remember it in fragments. It's important that you don't pressure her. Just be present. She nodded, with tears in her eyes. She took a deep breath and went in. Isadora turned her face toward her mother. Her lower lip trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. Mom? She whispered, her voice scratchy. Patricia ran to her daughter, kneeling beside the bed. She held her hand tenderly and tightly, as if she never intended to let go. I'm here, my love. You're safe now. I swear, no one will hurt you again. And there, in the silence of the room, mother and daughter were reunited. It wasn't the end of the pain, but it was finally the beginning of healing. For a few minutes, the two remained silent. But there was something that needed to be said. Isadora then whispered, with her eyes fixed on the window, "I don't remember everything, but sometimes I dream. I dream of a dark room, of someone calling me. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out." Patricia closed her eyes. The pain was unbearable. "And the baby?" she asked hesitantly. Isadora hesitated too. Then slowly she put her hand to her now empty belly. "He's still crying. Inside. Even after leaving." In the hospital boardroom, the doctors were gathered around a report. The preliminary results of the biopsy had arrived. Dr. Enrique read them silently to the social worker. Then he looked up and said, his voice heavy, "The tissue we removed is not a tumor. It is also not just a fetal malformation. There are genetic traces of a second fetus. A parasitic twin, possibly." Everyone looked at each other. The social worker was the first to react. "Are you saying she was pregnant with two?" Dr. Enrique took a deep breath and continued, "In a way, yes. But only one was born. The other developed until about 5 months. Then it stopped. But it was not absorbed as usually happens. It remained inactive, connected to the uterus by a rudimentary structure, as if it had stayed to observe." The silence that formed seemed to weigh tons. "This raises a delicate issue," he added. "If there was more than one fetus, there may have been more than one episode of violence." The atmosphere in the room froze. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Isadora watched the world through the window. Outside, life went on. Cars passed by, people walked by, indifferent. No one knew what she carried inside. In the neonatal nursery, her baby slept. Small, fragile, but with a strange presence hovering around the incubator, as if something there was not finished. Isadora knew. That story had not started on the day of the birth. And, definitely, it would not end there. 3 days had passed. Isadora remained hospitalized, accompanied by psychologists, social workers and nurses who took turns day and night. The baby remained stable in the neonatal ICU, fed through a tube. Patricia did not leave the hospital. She slept on a hard chair, next to the bedroom door, as if her silent vigil were capable of keeping the real world inside, and the other outside. That morning the child psychologist came in again. It was Dr. Helena. She brought with her a blank notebook, colored pencils, and a kind look. She sat down in front of Isadora, placing the material on the side table. "Do you want to draw today?" Isadora looked at the paper. Her fingers moved slowly to the black pencil. And without saying a word, she began to draw. First a bed. Then a door, half open. Shadows behind it. And 2 eyes, large, empty, without pupils, peering through the crack. Dr. Helena frowned slightly. "Who are those eyes, I say?" She stopped. The pencil fell from her hand. They never left." Isadora hesitated. She picked up the blue pencil that was on the table. The tip trembled between her fingers. She started with a line. Then circular strokes. Thin lines. Heavy shadows. She didn't say a word for several minutes. When she finished, she slowly turned the drawing to the psychologist. Dr. Helena observed in silence. It was a small room. No windows. A bed in the corner. A locked door. And in the center, a chair. On it, someone was sitting. There was no face. Just eyes. And shadow. Watching. "Does this place exist, Isadora?" Dr. Helena asked, her voice soft. The girl remained silent. She then answered without looking at anyone. "That's where he took me, when he said I was special." The psychologist held her breath for a second. "He, who? I don't know his name. He just said, for me to call him Uncle." Meanwhile, in the police chief's office, the expert reports arrived with more details. Injuries in different stages. Compatible with continuous abuse. Old bruises. Recent marks. The toxicology tests confirmed something even more disturbing. Sedatives in her system. Powerful substances. The kind of compound that could keep a child unconscious. For hours. Maybe days. Eduardo was there. His jaw clenched. His eyes were red but dry. "And you still don't know who did this to my daughter?" he asked, trying to contain his anger. The police chief nodded, his expression heavy. "We're investigating several lines. We already know that Isadora was missing for about 3 days. School records indicate that on some mornings she would simply disappear. Hours later she would reappear, as if nothing had happened. Always close to the end of classes in time to go home." He turned the monitor toward her. "These images were captured by security cameras at a gas station, 80 kilometers from here. They show a girl, who looks a lot like Isadora, getting into a white car. The driver has not yet been identified. But we have part of the license plate. We are tracking it." Meanwhile, in the psychologist's office, Isadora had started drawing again. This time a crib. Inside, a baby with its eyes closed. And next to it, an adult figure wearing a mask. A plain mask. Expressionless. "He watched everything," she whispered, almost as if confessing something she shouldn't have. Dr. Helena remained silent. "Isadora, do you remember where this place was?" The girl was thoughtful for a few seconds. "It was far away. Very far away. The car shook a lot sometimes. But I remember the smell. The smell of wet earth. And, every now and then, you could hear a bell." At night in the hospital room, Dr. Enrique entered with calm steps. He sat down next to the bed with the care of someone who carries a truth that is too difficult. "Hi, Isa. How are you feeling today?" She looked at him, her eyes sunken. "Better, I think." He smiled kindly. "Your baby is doing well. He's fighting. But he misses you." Isadora looked away. Her discomfort was visible. I'm afraid to look at him." "Why?" She took a moment. Her hands clutched the blanket as if holding back a pain that threatened to overflow. "Because I don't know if he'll remind me of everything I've lived through, or of everything I've lost." Isadora's words kept echoing in Patricia's head. Even hours later. Even in silence. Even in the darkness of the room when everyone was already asleep. The pain was still there. In the neonatal ICU, Patricia was allowed by the nurse to approach the incubator. She placed her hand on the glass, her heart aching, staring at her little grandson. The baby, so fragile and small, opened his eyes. For a moment, emotion took over her. But then, Patricia stopped. She stood still. Something in the baby's gaze made her spine shiver. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He just looked right into her eyes, staring, intense, as if he recognized her. A shiver ran through Patricia's body. She took half a step back, took a deep breath, and whispered, "You're going to have a different life. You're going to grow up surrounded by love. I promise." Outside the hospital, an unmarked police car pulled up discreetly. The officer got out with a brown envelope in his hands. Inside were the results of the hastily done genetic test. He stopped for a moment on the sidewalk as if feeling the weight of the paper. He opened the envelope. "Read it." He read it again. His face froze. "This can't be right." He closed the envelope slowly. He took a deep breath and went inside. In the hospital cafeteria, now empty, isolated, and filled with an almost ritual silence, the police chief met with Dr. Enrique, Dr. Helena, and the social worker. "The lab repeated the test 3 times, said the police chief, his gaze fixed on the papers. "And the result remains." He leaned slightly over the table. "The baby shares genetic material with the mother, as if they were siblings. On the father's side." A sharp silence fell. Dr. Enrique lowered his eyes in disbelief. That can only mean one thing." The social worker murmured, almost voiceless. "Is the aggressor in the family?" The police chief nodded slowly. "It means we need to look within." "Now, Because Isadora is still at risk. And the baby, too. Dr. Helena looked at the others with a serious expression. She hasn't said any names yet, but we know she knows. The blockage we're dealing with is typical of domestic abuse. She took a deep breath. The mind protects. It closes doors. It creates lies to endure. It pretends it wasn't real. But it was. At the end of that afternoon, something changed. Isadora asked to see the baby. For the first time since the birth. Patricia stayed by her side while the nurse slowly pushed the wheelchair through the corridors to the neonatal ICU. The silence between them was thick, as if the air carried more than words. When they arrived, Isadora stopped in front of the incubator. She stood there, static, breathing slowly, her eyes filled with tears. Then she took a step forward and got closer. The baby was sleeping, small, fragile, but present. "Does he look like me?" Isadora whispered, almost out of breath. Patricia forced a smile, her heart aching. A little, the nose, the chin. Isadora nodded, thoughtfully. But her eyes didn't look away. "He's so small. And yet, it seems like he knows everything." Patricia frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean, daughter?" The girl took a while. She swallowed hard. "When I close my eyes, I still see that dark room. I still hear the whispers. But now, he's there too." A shiver ran through Patricia's body. She looked at Isadora, scared. "Who I say?" Isadora raised her hand to the glass of the incubator. Very slowly, as if she were touching something sacred. "Will he grow up?" she asked without taking her eyes off the baby. Dr. Enrique approached with a gentle, almost paternal voice. "Yes, he will. He will grow up, he will become strong." Isadora remained silent, but her hand remained on the glass. Then her voice came out low, almost a whisper, almost a secret. "And will he know everything that happened?" Dr. Enrique exchanged a look with Patricia. Then he answered calmly, "Only if you want to tell him, Isadora. Only if you think he needs to know." Isadora said nothing. She just placed her fingertips on the glass, as if, with that, she could protect him from the world. "I just don't want him to grow up afraid to close his eyes." Hours later, Eduardo was called for a private conversation with the police chief. The room was silent, somber. The police chief was holding some papers in his hands. The tension was almost palpable. "Mr. Eduardo, we need you to cooperate with a DNA test." Eduardo frowned, surprised. "Are you accusing me?" "It's not an accusation. It's protocol. The expert reports indicate that the attacker could be someone very close. A first-degree relative." The silence was heavy, long. Eduardo closed his eyes. He took a deep breath and replied, "Do it. Do whatever you have to do. I want the truth too." The police chief nodded, but something in his eyes said that they were closer than ever. If it wasn't Eduardo, then who was it? The police chief, now with the support of two specialists, Dr. Enrique and Dr. Helena, decided to expand the investigation. School documents were cross-referenced with family records, visitor lists, old schedules. And then, something came up. A new DNA request was made. This time for Isadora's maternal uncle, Patricia's brother. He had distanced himself from the family months earlier, after a fight with Eduardo, Isadora's father. He lived far away but used to visit the house frequently in previous years. Isadora's school records showed an alarming pattern. During the period when her uncle appeared more frequently, she would start to skip classes, disappearing for hours, always close to the time she was supposed to go home. Patricia couldn't believe it. The words seemed to betray logic. "That is impossible. They were always so close. He said he loved her like a daughter. He took care of her when I wasn't there." The words, one by one, were falling apart in her throat. The shock was total. Meanwhile, alone in the hospital room, Isadora drew another sheet of paper, another piece of the truth. Another fragment of the darkness that was beginning to reveal itself. This time Isadora drew two dolls. A big one with a big smile. A small one crying. And in the corner of the sheet, with her uncertain handwriting, she wrote, "He said it was love." Time stood still. Because the truth now was too close. And no one, absolutely no one, was ready for what it would bring. On the morning of a silent Friday, Isadora's uncle's DNA test was ready. Dr. Enrique handed the envelope directly to the police chief, who opened it right there in front of Dr. Helena, Dr. Enrique himself, and Patricia, her mother. Total compatibility. The baby's biological father was Isadora's uncle. The police chief closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath and said, "Request the warrant." No. The man was temporarily living in another relative's house in a neighboring city. He was easily located. He did not resist the approach. At the police station, he sat down in front of the police chief with the calm of someone who did not understand, or did not want to understand, the gravity of what he had done. "She never said no," he murmured. "She liked me. It was just a joke at first." The silence that followed seemed to tear the air. The police chief kept his gaze steady. "She was 12 years old. You knew what you were doing." The man lowered his head. His voice was almost muffled. "No one looked at her the way I did. I protected her. She said she loved me. That she trusted me." The police chief interrupted. "She didn't need to hear anything else. That was enough." At the hospital, Patricia received the news from the social worker. She read the information once, twice. Then she went into the bathroom and vomited. She sat down on the cold floor. She collapsed. My brother. The boy I raised with me. Who I rocked in my arms, who I played with, who I taught to be good. How could he do this to my daughter? The words came out broken by pain, by disbelief. She cried as if her body was going to break. Later, it was up to Eduardo to tell Isadora the truth. She was sitting on the bed, her eyes fixed on the window. Dr. Helena, the psychologist, was by her side. Eduardo came closer, his eyes filled with tears. His voice, however, was firm. "Daughter. The test confirmed it. It was your uncle." Isadora didn't cry. She remained silent for a few seconds. Then, softly, as if she had found a fragment of herself amidst the rubble, she whispered, "So I'm not crazy." Dr. Helena leaned in slowly, her voice soft, almost like a whisper that embraced her. "You never were, Isadora. No one thought you were." Isadora closed her eyes. And for the first time, the silence inside her seemed different. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. She took a deep breath. And for the first time, there was a trace of relief in her voice. "I tried to forget. I tried to believe it was just a nightmare. But every time he came close, I felt a hole inside me." She squeezed her eyes shut as if gathering courage. "And now this hole has become a baby." Days later, the story exploded in Brookfield. 12-year-old girl pregnant by her own uncle. The headlines invaded sensationalist portals, like blades cutting through any shred of privacy or respect. Patricia had to deactivate all social networks. People began to appear in front of the hospital. Some out of morbid curiosity. Others, in shock, crying out for justice. And a minority, out of true empathy. The hospital reinforced security. Isadora was transferred to an isolated room. Protected. Silent. The courts acted quickly. The public prosecutor's office formalized the complaint. Isadora's uncle would be charged with rape of a vulnerable person, false imprisonment, psychological threat. At a press conference, the prosecutor in the case, Dr. Helena, was direct. "This is a monstrous crime. But, unfortunately, it is not rare. Our mission now is to protect this girl and ensure that this baby does not bear the weight of the crime that created her." In the last scene of that day, Isadora was taken back to the neonatal ICU. The baby, breathing on its own. She approached slowly. Patricia stayed behind, silent, respecting her daughter's moment. Isadora rested her forehead against the glass of the incubator. Rise. Come. But with the depth of someone who has seen the bottom of the abyss and survived. I didn't choose you. And you didn't choose to be born this way. But if someone has to break this chain, let it be us. Then Isadora smiled. Small, weak, but real. In that moment, she stopped being just a victim. She took the first steps to become something even stronger. A survivor. 6 weeks have passed since the birth. Isadora was discharged from the hospital, but under strict conditions. Intensive psychological monitoring. Frequent visits from the social worker. Increased security, including secret surveillance. She did not return to her old home. That place, where everything happened. It was no longer safe. Not physically, nor emotionally. The Child Protection Service provided a shelter in a neighborhood far from Brookfield. There, Isadora and Patricia would try something similar to a new beginning. Eduardo, by joint decision with the courts, remained temporarily in the old house, cooperating with the police, preserving evidence that was still under analysis. Isadora's uncle was in jail. The case against him was moving forward quickly. The medical reports, the drawings, the exams, the statements, everything was documented. Everything was clear. But a doubt, silent, insistent, hung in the air. What would be done with the baby? In the new house, small, protected, silent, time passed differently. Isadora kept the curtains in the room always closed. The crib was next to the bed. The boy, weighing just over 2.5 kilos, had been discharged from the neonatal ICU. He was healthy. He cried at night. He slept little. He continued to be an enigma to his own mother. Isadora watched him from a distance, as if facing something sacred and profane at the same time. Patricia was the one who did everything. She bathed. She changed diapers. She fed. Isadora watched. But she didn't get close. Until one night, after a more intense crying fit, which seemed to come from a very old place inside her, she murmured, "I want to hold him." Her voice came out low, trembling. Patricia, surprised, stopped. She looked into her daughter's eyes. And then, carefully, she placed the baby in her arms. For the first time, Isadora didn't tremble. She stayed there, in silence, swaying slightly, the little face falling asleep against her chest. And for the first time, something broke inside Isadora, but not in pain. It was something else. It was the silent sound of a chain breaking, of a guilt that wasn't hers beginning to dissolve, of a new tenuous bond being born there between two souls that didn't choose pain, but were choosing to continue. That night, Isadora didn't let go of the baby for hours. She didn't say much, but she didn't look away either. The silence between them was no longer one of rejection, was one of attempt, of a bond forming with trembling but present hands. Patricia watched from afar. Her daughter so small in her arms. Her grandson, still so fragile, but with an inexplicable calm in her lap. It was at that moment that Patricia understood. It wouldn't be easy. But maybe, it wouldn't be impossible. In the following days, something changed in Isadora. Small gestures. Subtle movements. She began to get up on her own during nighttime feedings. She learned to change diapers even though she was still afraid. She spoke little, but she began to sing softly to him. Songs invented on the spot with simple off-key words. But with a care that cannot be taught, it can only be felt. Eduardo, who remained physically distant, sent notes with the support of social workers. "You are stronger than any story they tried to write for you. We are with you. Always." Isadora kept them all in a shoebox, under her bed, like someone who collects hope. The legal process moved forward. Testimonies from doctors, psychologists, teachers, and Isadora herself were being organized. Dr. Helena, alongside the prosecutor, followed each step. She knew. It wasn't enough to punish the guilty party. It was necessary to create possibilities for the future for those who were left with the scars. And then a new dilemma arose. The baby. Would he stay with Isadora? Would he be adopted by another family? Would he grow up away from his mother so as not to carry the pain of his origins? Isadora listened carefully to everything. The social worker explained the options carefully, without rushing, without pressuring her. She just listened and remained silent. That night, she held the baby in her arms as she had been doing. But this time, she rested her face against his and whispered, "I'm still scared. But if you don't give up on me, I won't give up on you either." And then she cried. For the first time, without fear of the pain, without hiding from it. Because now she knew that the pain existed. But she also existed beyond the pain. The next morning, she looked the social worker in the eye and said firmly, "I want to keep him. I want to try." And at that moment, she wasn't just a survivor. She was a girl who chose love as her response to horror. Isadora's decision surprised everyone. Even Dr. Helena, accustomed to seeing victims give up on motherhood, had to contain her emotions when she heard that sentence. "I want to keep him. I want to try." It was like hearing the voice of someone rising from the ashes with their own hands. There was no illusion, no romanticization. There was awareness of the size of the challenge, of the weight, of the story. But above all, there was a choice. The public prosecutor's office began the process so that Isadora could maintain temporary custody of the baby. Patricia, alongside her daughter, committed to ensuring the necessary emotional and structural stability. The protection network has expanded. Psychologists specialized in childhood trauma. A sensitive and prepared pediatrician. Monitoring by the Child Protection Council. Support from a local NGO focused on family reintegration after violence. And perhaps most importantly, a school that welcomed Isadora with respect without judging her. There she went back to studying at her own pace, with a special plan, with other girls who also had similar silences. She was no longer the girl in the news. She was just Isadora, with her notebooks, her drawings, and now a baby in her arms. The baby, who still didn't have a name, started to smile more often. Even without understanding, he responded to his mother's presence calmly. It was during a consultation when the pediatrician casually asked, "What have you been calling him at home?" Isadora answered almost without thinking, "Lucas." That was the name she gave him in the drawings, on the nights when she whispered made-up stories to make him sleep. A simple name. Strong. Full of light. Lucas. 6 months passed. The court confirmed Isadora's permanent custody, with ongoing supervision. The uncle was convicted. Maximum sentence for crimes of abuse and rape of a vulnerable person. There was no appeal. The evidence was irrefutable. But Isadora did not show up for the trial. She did not want to relive it. She was busy living. On a clear afternoon in Brookfield, Isadora was pushing Lucas's stroller on the sidewalk of the temporary shelter. She stopped near a tree. Lucas was sleeping. She then bent down, took a pencil from her pocket and a folded sheet of paper from her school notebook. She drew 2 figures. A baby. And a girl with wings on her back. Above them, for the first time, she wrote a different sentence. "Pain brought me here. But love will take me forward." 5 years have passed. Isadora is now 17. Lucas 5. His messy hair is always glued to her chest, as if he recognizes it as the only truly safe place in the world. They live in a small home, far from the house where it all began, and much closer to the future she decided to build with her own hands. Isadora finished her studies. She ranked first in the entrance exam for social services. She wants to help girls like her. Girls who cry in the dark and are not heard. Who draw what they cannot say. Who grow up thinking that survival is the best they will ever have. But she wants to show them that this is not the case. They can do more. That spring afternoon in Brookfield, Isadora was returning home with Lucas after another routine appointment. He has always kept talking. Mom, when I grow up, I will be strong like you. She smiled. But she did not answer. Because she knew that true strength cannot be answered with words. It is shown with life. At night, alone in her room, she took a sheet of paper. Like she used to do when she was a child. She drew. But this time there were no sad dolls. It was her. Standing. With a child in her arms. And wings. Above the drawing she wrote in firm handwriting. I was hurt. But not destroyed. I was silenced. But not erased. Today I am a voice. Today I am a choice. Today I am a mother. And no one else writes my story for me. For every woman who carries an old, stifled or discredited pain, know this. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to do from now on. Be like Isadora. Survive. Then blossom. And when you are ready, breathe in. The end.